I never planned on working at a zoo, let alone a private one hidden miles off the main highway, surrounded by pine forest and steel gates. I was 24, broke, and one summer away from giving up on vet school when the job offer came through. Live-in caretaker for a private wildlife reserve. It sounded like a dream, and it was for the first few weeks. The owner, Mr. Callahan, was a mysterious, sharp-eyed man in his 60s who walked with a cane carved with the head of a lion. He didn't talk much, except to bark out orders or correct a feeding schedule. But he paid well and promised housing, meals, and a hefty end-of-season bonus. There was just one rule. Don't go near enclosure 9 after sundown. The zoo itself wasn't open to the public. It was private, as in invitation only for wealthy collectors, scientists, or the occasional eccentric millionaire who wanted to feed a giraffe or pet a lemur in complete privacy. The enclosures were large, well-designed, and surprisingly modern. The animals were healthy, and there were a lot of predators. Tigers, leopards, a pair of jaguars, wolves, even a hyena that laughed like a broken radio. My job? Feed, clean, observe. Make sure no one got sick. Make sure no one got out. The first few days were magical. I'd wake up before dawn, walk through misty trails with a bucket of meat slung over my shoulder, and watch the tigers stretch and yawn as the sun rose. I learned their names, their habits, their quirks. Tasha, the oldest female tiger, liked to sit with her back against the fence, daring you to touch her stripes. Mako, the younger male, would crouch low and pretend to pounce, always with a little rumble in his throat that was almost a laugh. There was something unnerving about the way he watched me, like he was measuring. There were monkeys, too. A whole troop of Capuchins who loved stealing my hat or mimicking my walk. They were harmless, funny, and probably the smartest creatures on the property besides the jaguars. One of them even figured out how to unlock a toolbox and lock it again just to mess with us. I slept in a small cabin about 200 feet from the main compound. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell reception, and no TV. Just a two-way radio and a set of emergency flares. Mr. Callahan said the isolation was intentional. He believed the animals lived better when the humans weren't distracted. At night, the sounds of the zoo came alive, not in a scary way at first. The distant roar of lions, the occasional screech of monkeys, the low growl of wolves howling at a moon they couldn't see. It was nature's soundtrack, but every once in a while, I'd hear something else. A metal clang, a low snarl too deep to identify. Once I thought I heard a whisper outside my window, but it was probably just wind. I kept to the rules, especially the one about enclosure 9. Nobody talked about it. Not the other two staff members, Marcy, the vet tech, and Luis, the night guard. Whenever I asked, they'd change the subject. Luis once said, just feed it from the outside. Don't ask questions. Don't look inside if you don't have to. I should have listened more carefully. But curiosity does what it always does. And in this place, curiosity is dangerous. One morning, everything changed. It started like any other day. I made my rounds, tossed meat to the hyena, scratched a goat behind the ears, and delivered vitamins to the jaguar pair, who blinked at me lazily from their shaded platform. When I got to enclosure 6, Mako and Tasha's, I stopped cold. The gate was open. Not wide open, just ajar. That shouldn't have been possible. Each gate had a two-lock system, and I always double-checked before bed. Louise, too. I approached slowly, heart thudding, hand on the radio. The enclosure looked normal. The grass, the rocks, the water hole, all undisturbed. But no tigers. Mako, Tasha, I called. No answer. No rustle. No breathing. Then I noticed the blood. A smear of it, dark and thick, near the fence post. Too small to be a tiger. Too much to ignore. I radioed Luis. No answer. I tried Marcy. Nothing. Then I did something stupid. I stepped inside. I shouldn't have stepped inside the enclosure. Every safety manual, every training rule screamed against it. But the silence, the open gate, the blood, it all pulled me forward like a hook through the chest. I needed to know what happened. The air inside felt different, heavier. I gripped the tranquilizer pistol holstered to my side. It wasn't strong enough to stop a full-grown tiger, but maybe it could buy me time if something went wrong. I crouched near the blood smear. Fresh. Still wet. It wasn't animal blood, at least not feline. It smelled wrong. Metallic, but also sour like spoiled meat. No tracks. That was the first thing that struck me. No tiger paw prints in the dirt. No drag marks. No signs of struggle. As if whatever happened had happened cleanly and deliberately. Tasha. I called again. Mako. Nothing. I circled the enclosure perimeter, eyes scanning every shadow, every patch of tall grass. My boots crunched over gravel, every step a drumbeat in my ears. Still no sign of either tiger. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard it. A low growl. Close. Behind me. I spun, gun raised. Nothing. But the growl had been real. My ears still buzzed with it. I slowly backed toward the gate, heart pounding. That's when I noticed something else. The feeding bin near the back wall had been turned over. It weighed nearly 200 pounds. Something strong had knocked it down. I didn't wait any longer. I radioed the main compound again. Still no response. By the time I locked the gate behind me, sweat soaked through my shirt, and my fingers trembled so hard I could barely clip the latch. I made my way to the staff trailer. Empty. Luis's flashlight lay on the table. His boots were by the door. His radio was still charging. I knocked on the bathroom. No answer. I checked the bedrooms. No Luis. No Marcy. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. This wasn't right. I grabbed both radios, pocketed a flare, and headed toward the main surveillance cabin. A concrete block up the hill, used mostly by Callahan and his IT guy, Rudy, who only came in once a week. I had no access to the camera feeds, but I knew they were stored there. When I arrived, I found the door slightly ajar. I raised my tranquilizer again. Luis. I called. Silence. I pushed the door open. The monitors were flickering. Dozens of split screens showing every enclosure. Most were normal. Animals pacing, napping, eating. But on screen 6, the tiger pen, there was nothing. No Mako. No Tasha. Just the overturned bin. And in the upper right corner, something moved. It wasn't a tiger. It was tall, thin, upright, and it was walking along the inner fence line. It moved unnaturally, like its limbs were just a little too long. Its arms dangled almost to its knees. I leaned in. The video glitched. It disappeared, then reappeared closer to the camera. A second later, the feed went black. I staggered back, nearly knocking over the desk chair. What the hell was that? That wasn't tiger. That wasn't human either. I checked the backup files, but they had been erased. Only live feeds remained. My hand shook as I grabbed the emergency radio transmitter and sent a broadcast to the nearest ranger station. Code black. Predator loose. Staff missing. Possible breach. Repeat, code black. No reply. I checked the logbooks. The last entry from Luis was at 2:11 a.m., a routine check of the hyena pen. That was 4 hours ago. I needed to find help. I needed to find Mr. Callahan. I jogged down the trail toward his manor, a 3-story house on the south end of the reserve, surrounded by tall fencing and motion sensors. I'd only been inside once. It was part museum, part trophy room, part military bunker. When I reached the gate, I noticed something odd. The keypad was broken. Not damaged, ripped out. Wires dangled like exposed nerves. Claw marks gouged the metal frame. Something had forced its way in. I ducked through the opening and crept toward the house. Inside, the air was cold. Too cold. Callahan had generators, massive ones, but even they shouldn't have powered the AC this high. The windows were all frosted. My breath fogged in front of me. Mr. Callahan? I called. No answer. I searched room after room. Display cases full of taxidermy. Walls covered in framed hunting licenses and black and white photos. A lion's skull sat on a pedestal, surrounded by tribal masks and ivory carvings. Then I found his study. The desk lamp was on. Callahan was there, sitting in his leather chair. Eyes open, mouth open, throat torn out. There were no signs of struggle. No overturned furniture. No blood trail. Just one clean wound. Surgical, like a predator had silenced him instantly. I turned to run and froze, because standing in the hallway, barely visible in the low light, was the same tall figure I'd seen on the camera feed. It didn't move. It just watched. I blinked, and it was gone. I ran. I didn't think, didn't breathe, just moved. Out of the manor. Down the stone path. Back toward the compound. What I saw in the hallway wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It wasn't even trying to hide. It had just watched me like it was waiting for something. For me to act. For me to see. And I did. I couldn't unsee it now. When I reached the main compound, I locked myself in the equipment room and braced the door with a metal shelf. My hand was shaking as I tried the emergency line again. Still nothing. Static. The radios were dead. The power grid seemed intact, but the signal tower was likely jammed or destroyed. I checked the cameras again. Still no tigers. Still no staff. But now, more enclosures were empty. The wolves? Gone. The jaguars? Nowhere to be seen. Even the hyena's pen was quiet. I scrolled through the footage manually. At 2:13 a.m., there was movement in the hyena enclosure. The animal was pacing, restless. Then it froze, ears up, tail stiff. Something entered the enclosure. Not over the fence. Through it, like it just phased through metal. The hyena bolted. A second later, the camera went dark. It was spreading. I pulled the old Zoom map from the supply drawer, unfolded it on the table. Every enclosure had ID numbers, 1 through 10, but only 9 were ever used. Except now, in small handwriting, I saw something I'd never noticed before. Enclosure 9, restricted, level 5. There were no feeding logs, no vet reports, no cleaning schedule, no blueprints. It wasn't on any of our daily routes. It wasn't even marked on the perimeter fence. But it existed, and I had a horrible feeling that what was out there, what killed Callahan, had come from there. I had to see it for myself, even if it killed me. I set out with a flashlight, a tranquilizer rifle, and a flare. The sun was setting fast, turning the treetops orange and red like they were bleeding. According to the old map, Enclosure 9 was beyond the ridge behind the Monkey Grove, where the land dipped into a gully lined with pines. I'd never gone there. Callahan told me it was unstable terrain. Nothing to see down there, he once said. Now I knew he was lying. I reached the edge of the ridge by twilight. A broken metal fence, half swallowed by vines, marked the path down. A faded sign swung from a bent post. Authorized staff only. Danger. Biohazard. What kind of zoo labels an enclosure biohazard? I climbed down. The gully was colder than the rest of the zoo. A wet, chemical smell clung to the air. I moved slowly, every step crunching dead leaves. Then I saw it. The enclosure. A massive steel structure, maybe 30 meters wide, built into the side of the hill. Unlike the others, it didn't have mesh fencing. It had walls. Solid steel, at least 12 feet high. No viewing windows. No signage. And one door, locked with 6 latches. Or at least, it used to be, because the door now hung wide open. Bent, torn inward, like something had pushed its way out. Inside, it was pitch black. I raised my flashlight. The walls were scored with claw marks. Deep ones. The ground was covered in old hay, bones, and something else. Old chains. Thick ones snapped like twine. In the center of the floor was a metal feeding hatch. Closed. I opened it. Inside was a tunnel, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. It disappeared into darkness beneath the compound. I stood there, heart pounding, sweat freezing on my neck. Then something behind me breathed. I turned, flashlight up. A shape darted through the trees. Tall. Too fast for a human. Too silent for an animal. I backed toward the path, rifle raised, safety off. That's when I heard the voices. Soft. Whispering. My name. Whispered from the trees. From inside the enclosure. From the tunnel. I ran. Back at the compound, the lights were flickering. I slammed the doors shut and bolted every lock I could find. I didn't sleep. Just sat with my rifle in hand, watching the monitors. More enclosures were empty now, but not all. One screen showed a tiger. Tasha. She was in the corner of a maintenance tunnel, alive but frozen. Ears down, mouth open. She was staring at something off camera. I switched to infrared. There was nothing there. Then for 1 second, I saw heat. A tall humanoid figure, standing in front of her, not moving. Then the feed cut, and the lights went out. The power was gone. The compound drowned in silence, broken only by the low hum of wind moving through the trees and the occasional click of metal cooling. I sat alone in the dark, rifle cradled in my arms, eyes on the monitors even though they were dead. My only light came from a backup lantern flickering on the desk. The red emergency beacon pulsed in the corner of the room like a heartbeat. I wasn't just afraid anymore. I was being hunted. I knew that now. Whatever had escaped from Enclosure 9, whatever Callahan had locked away down in that steel crypt, it wasn't an animal. It wasn't a predator in the traditional sense. It was something older, something wrong, and I was starting to think it wasn't alone. At dawn, I left the compound. I had no choice. The food stores were running low, the generator was almost dry, and I still hadn't found Luis or Marcy. There was no signal, not even static on the radios. And the emergency flare I'd fired off 2 nights ago had gone unanswered. I made my way toward the staff cabin. It was half collapsed, the roof crushed by something massive. Claw marks lined the walls like slashes from a giant rake. Inside, I found Luis, or what was left of him. His body had been carefully laid on the bed, arms crossed, eyes open, mouth sewn shut with wire. Like a ritual, like a warning. His radio was still clipped to his belt, dead, but his notebook was untouched, tucked beneath the mattress. The last page had a single line. It talks in your voice before it comes. My stomach turned. I grabbed the notebook, the extra ammo, and left without looking back. That afternoon, I returned to the main office to find a new message scratched into the whiteboard with something sharp. You opened the door. I hadn't, but someone had. And now, whatever was inside the tunnel under Enclosure 9, the thing that moved like smoke and thought like a man, was loose. I pulled out the old facility schematics again. The tunnel from the enclosure led beneath the feeding compound, all the way to the underground storm drains. A perfect route. No cameras, no locks, no light. I made a decision. I'd go down there. I had to see where it had gone, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to stop it. I entered the old tunnel entrance near the hyena enclosure, an access hatch I'd never been allowed to use. It smelled of oil, rust, and something far worse, decay. The tunnel was narrow, the walls damp. My boots echoed with each step. Water dripped from pipes overhead. I followed the markings on the map, turning left, then right, deeper into the underbelly of the compound. As I walked, I heard whispers, not behind me, but around me. Sometimes my name. Sometimes phrases I didn't understand. Old words. Wet sounds. They weren't echoing. They were inside my head. At one point, I passed a mirror. It was cracked, bolted to the wall for some reason. And in it, I saw myself. But not quite. My reflection smiled, even though I wasn't. I smashed it and moved on. Eventually, I found the hatch. A heavy blast door, rusted shut. But something had opened it recently. The bolts were broken, bent outward. Inside, the tunnel widened into a chamber lined with concrete and rebar. There were chains on the walls, symbols scratched into the stone, a pile of bones in the corner, some animal, some human, and in the center of the room, a nest. Not straw, not leaves, hair, skin, bits of clothing, and a single object resting in the middle. Marcy's ID badge, still warm. I froze. Something was here. I could feel it. I turned to leave, and came face to face with myself. Only not me. It looked like me. Same eyes, same uniform, same trembling hands, but the skin was too smooth. The mouth didn't quite move right, and the eyes were hollow. It cocked its head and spoke. I'm you, but you're not me. Its voice was perfect. My tone, my breath, my fear. Then it stepped forward, and its mouth unhinged. Wide. Too wide. I fired the rifle. It vanished into mist. I ran. By the time I reached the surface, the sun was setting again. The zoo was quiet now. Too quiet. The air was thick with something I couldn't describe. Like the zoo itself was watching me, breathing with me. I made it back to the compound, barricaded the doors, and finally, found the last emergency flare. But just as I prepared to launch it, I heard a knock on the window. I turned and saw Marcy standing there, but her mouth was sewn shut, and her shadow wasn't hers. Marcy's face stared through the window. Pale, still, lips sewn shut with something black and wet, like vines dipped in ink. But it wasn't just the stitches. It was her eyes. They didn't move. She didn't blink. And her shadow, it didn't match her body. It was taller, broader. Its head moved independently, like it was wearing her. I didn't open the door. Instead, I backed away slowly, flare gun trembling in my hand, heart thudding so loud I was sure she could hear it. Or it, whatever was in her skin. Then she smiled. Not with her mouth. It was still sealed, but with her eyes. And then she walked away. Just like that. Vanished into the dark. I fired the flare into the sky anyway. The red bloom burst above the trees, silent but screaming for help. I had no idea if anyone would see it. No idea if it even mattered anymore. Because I knew now, this wasn't about predators escaping. This wasn't about animals. This place was never just a zoo. That night, I didn't sleep. I flipped through every notebook, map, and file I could find in the main office. I uncovered fragments of reports buried deep in Callahan's archive drawer. Handwritten documents, unmarked folders, project labels with code names. One stood out. E9 acquisition, subject, anomaly, class unknown. The notes weren't scientific. They were full of symbols, sketches, phrases like non-native cognitive presence and mimetic instability confirmed. There was one photo, blurry, black and white. It showed a tall, vaguely human figure standing in the center of a holding pen. But its arms dragged the ground, and its head bent at a sickening angle. Underneath, a scrawled note. It becomes what you fear. It learns by watching. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until I saw my own reflection in the window, pale, wild-eyed, drenched in sweat. The next morning, something had changed. There were no more animals. The enclosures were empty. All of them. No sounds. No movement. No footprints. Like they had never existed. Even the tiger prints near the feeding trail were gone. I walked past cage after cage, hollow, silent, until I came to enclosure 9. The door was shut again. Sealed. Like nothing had ever broken free. Only one thing was different. My own face was scratched into the metal. Deep gouges, like claws had traced the shape. And underneath it, 3 words. You stay now. I ran back to the compound to find the flare box open. Empty. The fuel reserves? Drained. Radios? Smashed. Cameras? Melted. Literally warped plastic and metal. This place wasn't just abandoned. It had reset, reconfigured itself, like it was removing the evidence. I screamed. I kicked over the desk. I cursed every choice that led me here. But the worst part? I wasn't alone anymore. I heard it breathing in the vents. I saw it in mirrors I hadn't looked into before. I watched it mimic my walk, my voice, my handwriting. It was preparing. I made one last decision. If I couldn't escape, if I was part of the zoo now, then I would leave this behind for someone. Anyone. I started writing this down. I hid pages in sealed bags, stuffed into air ducts and feeding lockers. Maybe someone would stumble across them one day. Maybe another vet tech. A worker. A hiker. Maybe it would warn them. Because this wasn't just a place where animals lived. This was a feeding ground. But not for lions or tigers. For something that learns. Something that mimics. Something that becomes. Callahan tried to contain it. And failed. I opened the door. And now it knows me. It wears my face. It walks my paths. It feeds my animals, or what's left of them. And it watches. Always watches. Last night, I saw the cameras come back online. One by one. Enclosure 6, me, walking the perimeter. Enclosure 2, me, cleaning the hyena den. Enclosure 9, me, staring into the lens, smiling. But I've been in this room the whole time. I haven't left. I haven't eaten. I haven't slept. I don't know if I'm still me. But I do know this. If you're reading this, don't come here. Don't answer the job post. Don't take the bonus. And whatever you do, don't look through the glass at Enclosure 9. Because by the time you see it, it's already seen you.